flowery language. It's not just me in agreement with this. Numbers are in agreement with this as well. I see skepticism on some faces. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised by that. But what metric would you like to use? What measure would you like to pick from in order to see a difference between what was and what is? Life? Lifespans have grown from an average of 30 to an average of 70 in just 100 years, thanks to better food, GMOs, thanks to better medicine, like vaccines, reducing infant mortality, and increasing safety in the workplace and in travel and in the home. What about poverty? Poverty rates are down 80% since 1820. And around 10%, it's around 10% at the latest estimate. It's plausible that most of us in this room will see an eradication of abject poverty in our lifetimes. It's possible. What about war? Around the time of the 16th century, major powers in the world, all major powers in the world, were almost constantly at armed conflict with one another. Peace was only the brief break between these armed conflicts. You know when the last time two major powers were at war with one another? I mean, literally in a hot war. Does anyone have a guess?
1945.
It was actually 1950. Korea, United States and China. 1950 though, right? Violence itself is down by 48% since 1991, a precipitous drop. In 1971, there were only 31 democracies in the world. Now there are 105. I'll get to that. Give me a sec. I'm sure there's going to be time. Even those damn kids, with their faces in the iPhones, playing video games all day, literacy is still around 100% in the West. And worldwide, illiteracy is down to 17%. You should probably get a hold of Steven Pinker's book. If you can't, just take your time. Spend some time with the website Our World of Data. It has an incredibly thorough breakdown of this information. So, in spite of the story being told to you by most media outlets and most pundits and what have you, and most concerned over the stability and certainty, and of course by its detractors, Western civilization is a hardy weed. It grows in the most inhospitable environments, like extremophiles. Like recently, a sleeper shark was found in the caldera of an undersea volcano. For instance, did you realize that there's an active drug trade in federal penitentiaries?
Yeah.
How is that possible if what they're trying to do is prevent that kind of thing from happening? Western civilization, it's capitalism. Pinker mentions that Mao Zedong's death, just as one example, is one of the most significant single factors in lowering the rate of human starvation worldwide. Because what happened as soon as he died, farmers who had been forced into communes began to abandon their collectivized farms and till their own soil, and they stopped starving. This was noticed by the local authorities and magistrates that overlooked, and then they realized this was a kind of a good thing, and so it spread to other regions, it spread to other sectors of industry until you have what you see in China today, which is essentially a regime which is communist in name and a few controlling policies only. The naysayers will tell you that communists are about to take over everywhere in the West, that the fascists have taken over. Authoritarians have the upper hand, and they will regress us back to the Middle Ages. There are collapses, breakdowns, genocides happening right under our noses or just beyond the periphery of our vision, but they are telling us, they're sure that if you stand still and listen, you can hear the paint peeling, the veneer fading, and the walls crumbling. whatever their particular ideology, whether detractor or pessimistic supporter of Western civilization, but they seem to want to believe, you to believe in the fragility of Western civilization, because if you do, they might just have a solution, the solution. Somehow, the answers that they are always so sure of always seem to involve more control, more investment. They have the answer to unregulated, unmitigated, unadulterated freedom. It's to regulate, to mitigate, to adulterate. The naysayers depend on things being bad or having you believe that they are bad. Otherwise, their prescriptions are clearly absurd. This exercise in the destructive use of the human imagination is missing, of course, again, the bigger objective, boring, but quite measurable picture. Everything really is amazing, and it's because of Western civilization. I'm going to tell you a little something about a country that I know something about. I was a short-term, in my 20 years as a Christian, I was actually a short-term missionary to Rwanda. I was there in August of 1990. That was 2 months before shit began to hit the fan. It wasn't the genocide, but what happened was in October of 1990, Tutsi refugees from Uganda invaded the north, and that's what started the spiraling chaos that wound up in a massive genocide there. Most of the Rwanda nationals, when I was there, it was actually fairly stable. And most of the Rwanda nationals that I met, they never owned a pair of shoes. Have you ever actually seen poverty? Some of you have, I'm sure. Some of you have been abroad. But one thing that really kind of sticks out for me is, and the reason why I mentioned the fact that they never had shoes, is their feet. When you're walking around in a country that has the topography that's similar to West Virginia's tall mountains and everything like that, your feet swell. And they didn't have toenails. It's a weird thing to have stick in one's mind, I'm sure, but that's the one thing that really kind of sticks in my mind, is that their feet had swollen to the degree that, you know, they either subsumed the toenail or they had dropped off completely. That's real poverty. I had met people who literally lived in grass huts. They wrapped reeds together, put a thatched roof on. That's where they lived. Only the largest cities like Kigali and what have you had paved roads and running water. In 1994, at the height of their troubles, their gross domestic product had dropped from 2.5 billion when I was there to 753 million. Every other metric had dropped drastically as well. That's what war and chaos will do. As it stands today, the gross domestic product is 8.4 billion, and it's rising at a faster rate than it was back in the 80s. After embarking on an ambitious privatization program, eliminating barriers to trade and development, according to the Heritage Freedom Index, Rwanda is now 39th in the world. It was once like third from the bottom. So it appears that economic freedom, economic and social liberalization is directly involved in this precipitous rise. According to the World Bank, poverty was 56.7% in 2005. So over half of the people were out of a job. By 2013, that was cut to 39.1%, which is still huge, but it's continuing in that line. And this is with a population of close to 12 million. It was below 6 million in 1995. Now, it's not perfect. Rwanda is still dependent on international aid. The judiciary has issues with independence and transparency. It's essentially a one-party state, but the overall point that I'm trying to make here is Rwanda is a country with a growing population whose standard of living is improving, and doing so in one of the most depressed areas in the world. All due, it would seem by everything that we can see, to market and social liberalization, to westernization. A little bit of freedom goes a long, long way. That's all well and good. But are you denying that there are problems? Don't they exist? Are you trying to convince me that Western civilization is perfect? No, I'm not. Of course, there are problems. Just a few examples: the opioid addiction in the United States appears to be rising. That's a problem. Most gun deaths in the United States are suicides. That's a problem. Failing to enforce the rule of law against criminal behavior due to fears of being called things like racist or some other petty name. That's a problem in places like Great Britain and Germany. Appropriating property merely due to the skin color of the owner is a problem which ought to be exposed and resisted. But all that said, I suggest the naysayers tend to take what winds up being empirical outliers in order to exaggerate the problems that are there, or even to highlight their own problems. Pinker, in a number of videos, and I believe in the book here, quotes a quantum information scientist and theoretical physicist by the name of David Deutsch. The problems are inevitable. The problems are solvable, and the solutions to those problems cause new problems, which are then also solvable. In other words, folks, the goal is moving. And that's awesome. This is awesome. Humans are hyper-adaptable. We, as human beings, are adapted to adapt. Humans have adapted to all but the most extreme environments on the planet. And even in the most extreme environments, say the crushing depths of the ocean, or the freezing depths of space, human beings can survive for limited amounts of time. It will probably only grow. Fun fact, the International Space Station in November will celebrate 20 years in space. That's 20 years human beings have been living in space. Not all at once, they do rotate in and out. But it's happened for 20 years. Now, this is possible because unlike any other animal, human beings have ideas. A moving target is perfect because if the endurance running hypothesis has any merit, human beings are built to handle moving targets. The problems are what inspire creativity. They're what generate ideas, and ideas are, in turn, are the engine to the society that has been built up here in the West. And this society which rewards invention and application of these ideas. Western civilization, at least in part, seems to have been built up on this application of dreaming of solutions to problems. One can indulge in ideas and dreams and desires and deviate from the norm. Generally speaking, they can do this and not suffer official censor. One is permitted to have personal wants, personal desires, to decide for oneself what one needs. One is allowed to personally benefit from benefiting other people. The composite effect of all of these things is so good that people, a certain cadre of those who feel they must oppose Western culture, constantly fall to the temptation of inventing problems and enemies to fight. The rise and the success of individuality, of capitalism, of free exchange. These detractors have wormed their way to various institutions and spread their invective against the object of their vitriol, on the theory that this is the best way to legitimize and propagate their damning condemnations. They've used these institutions' basic function to mitigate chaos in order to recast individualism and free exchange, with all its flaws, all its idiosyncrasies, as chaos. And then they use the very deep and quite natural fear of chaos to their advantage. This fear then conveniently dovetails with the tendencies that human beings have, with availability heuristic, negativity bias, and their calls for control over other people can be called order and decency and progress. The problem with this strategy is that in spite of any short-term gains, by participating in the system, in Western civilization, the civilization is strengthened and belies their message completely. This is why collectivists, authoritarian revolutionaries, must abandon this strategy again and again and resort and return to violence again and again. It is the only way such concepts can be initiated in a broad context. Because once people are left alone, they will exchange freely. They will associate freely. They will imagine and create and observe, and then to try to solve problems freely. They will express themselves freely, and this will result in the emergent order that is Western civilization. Another problem with this strategy is that those who seek to control others are themselves slaves of control. They're not so much creative as clever, which is a distinction I made earlier, yesterday rather. Ultimately, no new ideas are brought forth, and without new ideas, these groups and these regimes begin to stagnate and decay. And that can only be sustained in the least creative way possible, once again, the violent exercise of force. And in a world that is increasingly less tolerant of such violence, more and more force in more and more concentrated manner is needed in order to accomplish what a few might have done with less resources at an earlier time. It has simply become too expensive in a myriad of ways in order to be violent and revolutionary. This is thanks to Western civilization. I'm going to quote economist Brian Kaplan here. Western civilization is better. People around the world will choose it when it's on the menu. Part of the reason it's better is the West's openness to awesomeness. Anything good can join the Western bandwagon. That's why Arabic numerals are a triumph in Western culture. When Western civilization encounters competing cultures, it gleefully identifies its competitors' best traits and adopts it as their own, as its own, as our own. And by the time Western culture commands the globe, I gotta find my spot. By the time it commands the globe, it will have appropriated the best features of Asian and Islamic culture. Even its nominal detractors will be westernized in all but name. Picture, and we've had some religious discussions amongst everyone, so this will be interesting to throw out. Picture how contemporary Christian fundamentalists, consumerism, and gender roles would have horrified Luther or Calvin. Western civilization is a good winner. It doesn't demand total surrender. It doesn't force fans of competing cultures to formally recant their errors. It just tempts them in 100 different ways until they tacitly convert. Unquote. So what? Are there no legitimate threats? Of course there are. I mentioned some of them. There will always be explicit opponents to Western culture, and new ones crop up every generation. Any such opponent could be a significant threat, but Western culture has faced down these threats. Bigger threats. Ottoman Empire, big. Soviet Union, big. Red China, big. So my answer as to how one faces these threats and these problems, which do exist, again, not denying them, create temptations. Have ideas. Have all of the ideas. Let's hear them. yourself. If you see something awesome, buy it, repurpose it. Just be relaxed and happy and stand your ground for the ability that you have to express and even repackage ideas. Humans flourish amid more ideas, more temptations, more adaptations and adoptions of awesome, not less. Big ideas, small ideas, silly ones, clever ones, dangerous ones, even stupid ones might have some measure of merit, if for nothing else, an example of what not to do. Often the best ideas are obscene, insane, or unoriginal. This rise is uncontrollable. It is unstoppable. There is momentum and movement and life here. Just move with this flow. Move forward in humility and courage. Be of good cheer. It's a good thing to say on a Sunday, right? Be of good cheer. Have confidence and reckon yourself as part of a grand tradition, because it is true. You are the inheritor of tremendous wealth, of tremendous personal freedom, of tremendous power. You are the weed. Have confidence in the power of Western civilization, the power of ideas, the power of freedom, because it is legitimate power. I close with another quote here from Brian Kaplan. The fragility thesis is flat wrong. There is absolutely no reason to think that Western civilization is more fragile than, say, Asian civilization or Islamic civilization or any other prominent rival. But merely saying that Western civilization is no more fragile than other cultures is a gross understatement. The truth is, Western civilization is taking over the globe. In virtually any fair fight, it steadily triumphs. Why? Because as fans of Western civilization ought to know, Western civilization is better. Given a choice, young people will choose Western consumerism, Western gender norms, and Western entertainment. Anti-Western governments from Beijing to Tehran know this to be true. Without draconian censorship and social regulation, West-toxification will win, unquote. So relax. Be happy. Have ideas. Ultimately, the prophets of doom cannot be more wrong. The weeds, this weed, you weeds are inheriting the earth, and it is amazing, and it is okay to be happy about it. Thank you. I think I have I grabbed my.
No, I'm just going to grab a mic in case for Any questions? We got about 10 minutes for Q&A.
Get this book. Get this book. It will make you happy.
Not the imperial system.
You know, I mean, it's habit. It's habit, but you know, as awesome things, you know, get certain things that are awesome take a little time, but it'll. You know, I'm not gonna deny that the metric system can be very much more efficient. You know, but it's really something that people are used to. So.
Measurements are arbitrary.
Yes, sir. Is the West? Well, I don't think it is, but I think it's But taking over in what way? I mean, there is an immigration issue. I'm not going to deny that, you know, I'm not going to deny that Islamic culture is not Western culture. It is not nearly prone to accept awesome into its culture, but it is inherently weak as a result of that. You know, whatever problems, you know, pure Islamicists will bring, to these Western nations, whatever problems those will be identified and those will be dealt with ultimately. When young people have a choice, overwhelmingly they choose the West. So if they are. Right. They were becoming. Iran was becoming modern, but then you had the revolution in '79. I'm just repeating what you said so everyone can hear.
Right. I'm awkwardly jumping in here, and yeah, I definitely want to talk about this. One of the things we've got to do is Dr. Summers' flight is a little bit earlier than we thought, and we want to see if we can just kind of move that up now, and then we can kind of continue a Q&A later, just due to time. And promise we'll get back. Thank you. Next, and I'm not even sure if this mic's working. It may not. I'm just really loud. So, Bundy Gang is a social political commentator, really good guy, really fair, taller than me, nice guy. Check him out. He's been on and off Twitter, been kicked off, kicked on. They've used to punish Bundy Gang. But check him out. Google him. He's really good. He's going to be interviewing Dr. Summers. This will not be an interview in the style of like Thomas Smith, Sorry I Forgot, which was an interview. This will be a functional conversation. Thank you.
Hi guys, hi. I just want to let everyone know here. I'm very humble. I'm really humble. Thank you, man. I was expecting you. How you doing? I'm doing good.
They left without me.
They left us out.
Yeah, I came down late, and then it was, I don't know, she said it was 10 miles away. I pictured myself on a long ride. So I said, all right, I went back to my room, and I watched a documentary on the Russian Revolution.
Oh yeah?
It was fantastic. BBC.
You watched the entire documentary?
I started with the original Romanov Tsar, and then I haven't actually got to the revolution, but the BBC runs the best history documentaries, and they make it fun. So you can just sit one evening and then suddenly you know all about Russian history.
When you sit down and you watch something, maybe read something, do you just sit down and watch that and focus, like, you know, pay all, like 100% attention to it, or do you like?
You know, I used to, but I am afraid that social media has, you know, rattled my brain, and I'm worried sometimes that I don't have the concentration I once did.
Yeah.
So I'm a bit, and I'm very nervous if I don't have my phone nearby. I'm checking it constantly, and apparently this isn't good for your mental health. So
I would have to say that ever since you know, coming on social media and starting to use it more frequently, it definitely takes a bit of a toll on your brain and your soul. I mean, you don't need to believe in having a soul or anything like that, but it just feels like sometimes it's all consuming, because someone like you have these opinions, and you have strong opinions, and of course, you know, people will meet that with a lot of anger. And so, do you find that is the predominant experience that you're having with social media?
no, you know, it's funny. I don't encounter as much anger as people might think.
Okay.
Because I don't really fight with people.
Okay.
Like, even on Twitter, I try to talk to them. And lately, I haven't been doing this thing, you know, where you'll find someone who's really obnoxious, unless it's a very famous person, then I might.
Yes, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
If it's something, it says something I really disagree with, I'll always do it under, and I'll do it politely, and say, just, you know, for another opinion, why don't you read this, or think about this? So I try to be civil, and then people tend to respond in kind.
Yeah.
And as I said, even on YouTube with my factual feminist video, most of the comments are I love the comments. You know, I read them, and I learn from them, and they're helpful. So I haven't had that kind of. The negative experience for me is going on, and people will, because I'm following a lot of things that have to do with, you know, cultural issues and gender issues. People will send me outrageous stories about something, and then I get upset. And sometimes I'm going through my Twitter feed, and I think I'm looking for trouble. You know, I go through and get upset, you know, and then why do this to myself?
I think I saw that tweet. You were. I remember seeing that. You were flying to Phoenix, and you mentioned that you're looking for trouble.
I was, well, because I got onto the flight with good intentions. I brought a lot of work to do. I had books. I had an apple. I wasn't going to eat junk food. I had 3 glasses of wine, ate junk food, and went on, downloaded the Wi-Fi. What is it? Go Wi-Fi.
Yeah, Go and Fly Wi-Fi.
It's getting better.
Yeah, it's
So
so
now-
expensive though.
It
It's
used to
insane.
be that you couldn't go on the internet on a flight, and I wish you couldn't, because now I go on there and
You just get sucked in.
get sucked in, and then I think if I have drinks, then it lowers your inhibitions. And you
Oh, for sure, totally. Having drinks before any
tweeting
kind
while drinking.
any kind of public engagement is the best.
Yeah,
It really is
it
the
is.
best. I just feel like, you end up being your real self for the most part, which is a bad thing, right?
With alcohol?
Yeah, totally. Sometimes you let that realer self out because you're less guarded, you're less worried about what.
Yeah, I
the
think
ramifications would be
we don't
based
want to
on-
encourage drinking, but
Yeah, of course.
you're
I'm not
right,
saying-
you're right, we're not saying you should, but it's kind of right.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's why they do it.
I just saw a study that said they took a group of people and asked them to do some complicated, or actually come up with some creative solutions to a problem, and the people that had had a couple of drinks did better. I pointed that out.
I wanted to ask you a question, okay? This is completely unrelated to anything we've been just talking about, okay? 100% just we're gonna go into another
realm, okay.
Another realm, exactly.
The Russian Revolution?
No, I want to ask you, okay, do you think that men today do not know how to talk to women by comparison to yesterday's standards?
I think there's a lot of confusion,
Yeah?
because they get so many mixed signals. And first of all, there's just a lot of people that don't seem to have been brought up, maybe in the absence of fathers, a culture of fatherlessness, I'm not sure, but they just, for whatever reason, when I was young and a little wild and running around in Los Angeles, the boys were basically polite. Even the bad boys, there were lines you would never cross. And now those lines are blurred, so there's a lot of vulgarity, a lot of boorishness. Okay, and then so kids haven't learned basic civility. All right, maybe I'm just decrying or falling morals of the young, but I think then women are, I've heard young men, they tell me, if I open a door for a girl, I don't know if she's going to snap at me. Or, a friend of mine told me the other day, he tried to help a woman pick up something heavy, and she said, I can do it. She was insulted. So, if you have an experience like
Really?
that, you're going to be...
I have never had an experience like that.
No,
That's crazy.
and I need help all the time.
Yeah, well,
And I've always, been another kindness gentleman, to help with things. And now there's, a lot of doubt about what we're supposed to do. And now in the Me Too era, I think sex has just become scary because, of course,
100%.
people say, oh, teach your son not to, attack people. I taught my sons to be considerate, kind people. They won't attack people. But now, because of the new definitions, and, if someone has a drink, then you're taking advantage of them. There's a lot of fuzzy lines. And blurred lines. Oh, blurred lines. That song was banned. People attempted to ban it.
People like that song.
I like that song.
They like that song in the beginning, but then, years down the line with the social justice movement, they were like, wait a minute, this song is bad for this, and this reason. But we enjoyed it before. That's the thing that I thought.
Yeah, well, that song had lyrics that people were able to show were in dozens of other songs. Some songs, popular with female singers, and so it's all very selective, very confusing, very inconsistent.
Okay.
And this is what I regret, is just all of the policing and monitoring and the censorious attitude.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I want to know what kind of advice would you have for men today that are, that are willing to, try to approach a lady?
Yeah. I just think you can't go wrong in life if you are considerate and, attentive to the other person. And, so a person who's just a bully isn't going to listen to me, but most people aren't. Now, the good news is, and I hope this doesn't change, but I ask my sons, I ask their friends. They tell me that I say, oh, are you meeting all like these angry gender warrior girls, you know? And my son tells me once in a while you'll meet someone like that, but most girls aren't like that.
They really aren't.
They're nice.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid some boys are going to get very bitter and think, oh, there's these angry women that just want to yell at you or, you know, condemn you or report you. No, the majority are still, and that's the thing. They're not that different. You know, boys and girls. They're not. There are differences between the sexes, but basically, people are looking for friends. They're looking for love and to be happy. And
that's what's been shown to us in the media over and over again. This idea of love and marriage and all that, and reinforced.
Yeah, and people still want that.
Of course. So, but then, if people still want that, why is there this major disconnect? Why is there this sudden pushback towards this like traditional form of thinking in terms of, you know, I want to get married and have kids, and, you know, what's going on there?
Yeah.
Why is that such a bad thing when it's been propped up in society as a very good thing?
Well, I think you had the gay rights movement, now the trans rights movement, and they get a lot of attention because what they're trying to argue is that they do not want to be marginalized, they don't want to be harmed, and so they are urging society to have not just tolerance, but acceptance. I think doing that, there was the majority who do have conventional, you know, sexual orientation, was put it, you know, the whole majority was sort of silenced and almost pathologized. Heterosexual males. It was, now that, I sometimes see that as being pathologized in the way we used to look at, you know, the sex lives of gay people. Now we are doing it to heterosexual men. And so the things they like, if they like to look at, you know, images of beautiful women, that's considered taboo, and it's, you
don't
make
look
a
at sexy girls.
Yeah.
Stop it.
Stop looking at
Stop looking at
sexy
sexy
girls.
girls. Yeah. Straight up. Like, you're just sick. You guys are sick.
Well, they make you feel, and I worry about little boys who are brought up to be ashamed of just, you know, their natural interest in female beauty, and you know, so that sort of thing bothers me. I think it's very confusing for.
Do you know what I've stopped doing? I do not. I mean, here's the thing. Tell me if this sounds crazy, okay? You let me know if I'm crazy. All right?
I will.
And thank you. Anytime I will not have any kind of sexual relations with a woman unless I can possibly picture them, you know, having a kid of mine and be okay with it. Because for me, this might sound crazy. For me, the idea is that, like, I don't want to be caught in a situation where someone wants to have a kid, and then it's very possible that I don't want to have any kind of relationship with them in the future. So, being in that situation, like, and because I've seen that happen to some of my friends where they end up like having sex with someone, and it's like, oh no, now they're stuck with something that I'd rather avoid. So, for me,
it's interesting that I've thought about this. We talk a
yeah,
lot about
crazy. Am I crazy?
No.
Yeah. Oh.
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
It's okay about the sterile. It's fine.
It's interesting that men really don't have reproductive rights. You know, we talk about women, and correctly so, wanting to protect their reproductive rights. My God, we talk about nothing else, on and on. But a man, if you ask, you know, if a woman gets pregnant, you have no control. Of course you can't tell her what to do. But if she decides to have the baby, you have to support it.
Of course. Well, I mean, here's that, and that's the thing. If I were to be with someone and that were to happen, well, I would own up and support the baby. I'd have to.
Right,
That's why.
because but see, if you really don't have full control.
100%. Yeah, I agree.
And it's just interesting that we look so much on the side of the women and never see the, you know, that men have a lack of control, you know, issues too. But as far as what you do, I think it's sensible to be careful, and certainly not to run off with someone who's unstable and you don't always know.
well, that's it. And also, once again, we're in this era of Me Too, where you see people like Aziz Ansari. You know, he ends up in a situation with
That was just
he
a
barely
terrible
knows.
thing. That was, I felt he was humiliated.
Of course, it's humiliated, and it's
But
like
it was so mean-spirited, and this is what bothers me, is feminism isn't supposed to be about meanness. It's not supposed to be about, you know, dehumanizing people. It's supposed to be the opposite. And I see too much bullying, dehumanization, doing the very things to men that they claim, sometimes truly, that were done to them as women. And so that's not the goal here. The goal is not now to tyrannize men or try to ruin men's reputations.
Do you find a lot of this has been, once again, we've come back to this, has been amplified by social media, allowing people to pretty much cherry pick certain bits of information, propping those up with the narrative or within a narrative, and then allowing this you know, this just thing to just have like a bit of a steamroll effect or something like that.
Absolutely. Because you now have these Twitter mobs and these shaming campaigns. And I thought it was one of the very disturbing things early on in Me Too was there was this young woman, I think she'd been at the New Republic, and she posted on social media a list of the names of, it was called the Shitty Men's List. It was names of men in media who, and people reported them for harassing them. So they were well-known journalists who had, mostly, who had committed various crimes against women. Some crimes, some of it was horrible, some of it was, you know, he took me to a weird lunch, you know, or stared at, you know, and there was no way to check if they were true, and they were anonymous postings. And they hurt these people. And now people are saying, oh, we should have more of these anonymous lists, and they are circulating. And it's a scary thing because it's a little totalitarian. You know, you could be named by an anonymous informant that takes you down. A lot of left-wing people pushed back because they remembered these lists that were circulated accusing people of being communists in the 50s. But they were older. The younger people seem not to know. They don't know the history of blacklists and secret informants, apparently. And they were happy to have it.
Well, do you find, though, that, like, I mean, everybody to some degree, if they think about it, can at some point be targeted for something like this, if someone wanted to. I mean, I'm pretty sure there's guys in this room that have been in an awkward situation with a lady before. You know, you sent the wrong thing and you had a foot in the mouth moment. You know, and that's.
Is this a confession?
No, I'm sorry. I mean, I've definitely done stupid things, like really dumb things, but I mean, it's just like.
And girls never do dumb things.
Well, I mean, the thing is, like, I mean, eventually I ended up just classing up a bit, you know, and this is when I was like.
See,
a teenager
that
or
seems to
something
be,
like
that's one good thing that could come from the Me Too movement, just classing up a bit, upping your game, being a little
Yeah, well, you
more.
don't, yeah.
I think that I always look for the bright side, and I think there is, and I wrote about it early on in the New York Daily News. I wrote a piece about the Me Too movement, how it could be an occasion for men and women to kind of rewrite the social contract between them, and a little more dignity and respect in the workplace. And I think women are telling men that they don't want to be treated just like one of the guys, you know, and then imagine, you know, what the way men want things isn't exactly the way women want. And so it was an occasion, it can be an occasion for a great conversation between men and women and a new understanding. However, there are people in the movement that seem to be taking it in another direction, towards blaming all men and reporting men, frightening men, and saying, now it's our turn, you know, and to ruin you, you have been ruining us. Let's not ruin anybody. Let's you know, have communication, and let's have understanding, and let's have empathy, mutual empathy.
Do you find that when people in the normal people in real life, just everyday people, are starting to like wake up to this thing that's happening online, these moves that are happening online, being like, wait a minute, I just saw Aziz Ansari get hit with that. It's very possible that
I think the Aziz Ansari case shocked the conscience of lots of people, and I think it really discredited that side of the Me Too movement.
I couldn't believe it because I mean, look, I know plenty of guys, right? Now some of them are married, have kids, you know, good men that have, you know, slept around and done stuff that wasn't. And I read that and I was like, this is just so common, and that's this.
And she played a part in it. It was the two of them, and at any time, you know, she could have left or she could have talked to him, And I thought it was just a, you know, a lot of miscommunication and just a bad date. But there was a fine article by Caitlin Flanagan in The Atlantic who called that expose on, she called it revenge porn. And that, you know, we wouldn't tolerate it if a man did that to a woman, but why would we tolerate a woman disgracing a man and humiliating him? And it was just very bad journalism.
Yeah, and what I thought was amazing was the publication that ran that.
Yeah,
how they were both, the Babe.net or some shit like that. They were boasting about it. They were boasting about it. They were like, oh, look at all the places that covered our story. It's like, why? Why was like that? That's the angle. The angle is to take down someone. If something happens, that you're going to go to a news publication instead of actually, like, you know, maybe figuring something out in terms of what happened with the other person.
Yeah, and also, what's happened too in the Me Too movement is there are activists and actresses and celebrities and so on who don't want to admit there are distinctions. And so you had very early on, you know, Harvey Weinstein, we all agree, was a monster.
Yeah.
And then Al Franken, who was, you know, annihilated and had to leave the Senate. And people pointed out, well, you know, being I think it was actually Matt Damon who was on a CBS morning interview, and he expressed great sympathy with the Me Too movement, wanted the harassment to stop, but he said, you know, but we have to be reasonable. There's a difference between, this is Matt Damon saying, there's a difference between raping someone or, you know, molesting a child and patting someone on the butt. And he talked about distinctions, and we had to think about not punishing everybody in the same way, and forgiveness and understanding. Immediately, within days, you know, there were 23 signatures on a petition to have him removed from his next movie, and Minnie Driver, his former co-star, told him, you know, this is not the time for you to talk, and it's all wrong, and why can't you, men understand that? You have to just sit down and be silent. Well, who is she to say that? And no, men don't have to sit down and be silent.
Nobody has to sit down and be silent.
No, we have to talk to each other. And so that's what I worry about, is it becoming a kind of, you know, female chauvinism gone mad.
Well, do you feel like things are eventually just going to balance out, and as once again people wake up a little bit more and they realize that they're all very flawed? Everyone at some point realizes that they've done things that are just like, they're like, oh, well, I could have done that a lot better. I'm a flawed human being. When they realize that, do you feel like there's going to be a kind of balance? It's going to be met where people are going to be like, all right, well, let's just start talking about our stuff openly with one another and just be real with one another.
Yes, and I think there'll be even progress in the sense, I think there's a real opportunity. People are thinking about this, thinking about how they're related to the opposite sex, and could take us to a new level of understanding. So I think that could be the good thing, as long as we can get through the witch hunt part.
So we're gonna wrap up the interview. I just wanted to say thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure meeting you.
Pleasure meeting you.
Thank you. I wanted to actually ask a question, one question from the crowd. If you can get one good question, one question. Anyone have a question? I know it's a lot of pressure, but just ask.
Yes.
What's up?
I had a question. You were talking about the.
Can you speak up?
Sorry. I had a question since you had talked about the Me Too movement, and you know, obviously you're well known as being a feminist, but not the way that so many of them are these days. What do you think about the lack of response to the 120 decibels movement in Europe by feminists here in the United States?
By the 120.
It's the movement against the migrants in Europe.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Did you hear about that?
Yeah, I did. I've heard a lot about these, what's going on in Europe, and
good question.
Yeah, two things. I do wish, in general, that the American feminist movement was more connected to causes around the world, but not so much in Great Britain, but I go to international women's conferences where I meet, you know, the women's activists from, you know, Somalia and Egypt and Cambodia, and that seems to be such a natural alliance, and yet you see very little of it. We saw in the 1980s on our campuses, there was a huge outpouring of activism against apartheid in South Africa. But where do we see in the, this decade any activists against apartheid and gender apartheid in Iran? About the other issue about migrants and so forth. I'm a factual feminist, and I question a lot of statistics and narratives, because it's sometimes hard to get to the truth. Like, I'm not convinced we have a rape culture on our college campus. I think we have a binge drinking culture, and a lot of unfortunate consequences of that, but I'm not persuaded that it's anywhere like it's described by the activists. About Europe and the migrants, I know there are terrible things going on, and the crimes you describe in Sweden and England, but I don't have a clear picture of what's actually going on, and if it's being exaggerated, if it's narrative driven, and I'm at this point open-minded, as I try to be, but a little skeptical. I'm not yet sure that there aren't sort of strange agendas at work, activists on both sides.
Yeah, exactly.
And I just don't know. I don't know yet, so in that sense I don't know enough about it, but I'm open-minded either way.
Okay. Guys, thank you so much for watching that and being quiet and not yelling over me. I really appreciate that. Sorry?
Don't say guys. Don't assume our gender.
Oh, that's guys. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
And does it bother you? Do people ask you where you're from?
Well, people, thank you. Now, this is the interview. Oh, you're going to interview me?
Yeah,
Amazing. It's fine. It's fine. I don't want you to be late, that's all.
No, sorry.
So, do people ask where I'm from? Yeah, they ask me where I'm from regularly, or they assume. Sometimes people, I get called, there's been things I've been called Muslim Keemstar. I've been called Indian Keemstar. You know who Keemstar is? Keemstar is the king of drama on YouTube. Like, this he's all over it. He has a show called Drama Alert and all that stuff. And we both have beards and we kind of look similar, so I joke that I'm his Indian cousin, but people call me Muslim Keemstar or anything like that. But most of the time they assume that I'm Muslim or Pakistani because I don't have a
It doesn't bother you?
No, it used to when I had a weaker identity. When I was like, oh,
guys, that's not me, that's not me.
I didn't, but that's when I was like.
Oh, no, what I'm saying is it's a microaggression to ask someone who's, looks Hispanic or looks Asian, it's supposedly, and I asked Asian friends of mine, and they said, first of all, it's mostly other Asian people that ask them where they're from, even though they're Americans. You're Canadian. So I assumed you were American at first. Sorry.
I'm very good at blending in. And I have to be. That's what happened. I mean, I'm first generation, so I had to integrate. All my parents were integrating as well. So in order for me to integrate, I had to really kind of adopt the culture over here and just fully inject myself into it. So that's why.
And is your family happy that you're a YouTuber?
No. They would like it if I was, my dad, he says, just become a programmer. Just become a programmer, do this. I'm like, I don't want to sit at a desk. I want to talk to people, Dad. That's what I want to do. So that's it, and it's, but no, apart from that, my parents are just really chill people. They support me all the way. So
that's good.
Yeah. I'm very fortunate to have the parents that I do, and it's been, though it was harder growing up for sure, because they were also in the process of integrating. I mean, imagine being someone that lives in India for like 30 plus years and then comes to Canada, and suddenly you're leaving what you know behind, and you're greeted with something entirely different, and then you have a kid on top of that, so you're not only acclimating to the environment, but then you have to help me acclimate to the environment. And it's like, how do they manage to do that? I don't know. How they
where in Canada?
Montreal.
Oh, that's fun.
It is a fun city. You've been to Montreal?
Oh, yeah. Vous parlez français?
Oh oui, bien sûr.
Yeah, en français. Alors, je vais partir.
Okay.
Wonderful to see you.
It was really good. Enchanté.
sure the mics work?
What we're going to do is we're going to bring Michael back up here. We're going to finish the Q&A that he was doing. We're going to take a tiny little break after that, and then Rocco's on stage. Michael?
You are.
Yes, so those of you that have remembered your questions, just, I guess, raise your hands.
Well, we had the
We'll
last
find you.
question we were dealing with here was with Iran, and I actually am old enough to remember that. And a couple things to remember there. If I'm not mistaken, the Shah was an installation by the West. He was someone that was installed there, and unfortunately, he also indulged in a tremendous amount of violence against the population of Iran. And it seems to me that his actions tended to give a lot of credence to, the revolutionaries, the authoritarian revolutionaries of the Ayatollah, a lot of credence. And it just opened the door there, and the people of Iran, they wanted a regime change. They got the regime change, but they didn't get what they wanted, or I believe that what they were promised. And as we see now, they are starting to stir again, to revolt. But we also see liberalization in Iran as well. They're relaxing certain standards because they're having to. It's untenable to be that draconian and that at the same time. So. I think because of the decaying nature of the repressive influence of extreme Islam, I don't see them. I see them making certain gains, but I don't. We can see that their communities are in certain circumstances able to establish their own kind of judiciary in some areas, but they have to do it on the DL. They have to be secretive about it. And when a broader community of people figure out what's going on, the hammer comes down. And it exposes not just their anti-liberal and anti-Western practices in their communities, but it also exposes the people who defend their practices. I really have a lot of hope and encouragement and positive feeling about Europe, even in the face of this, because quite frankly, again, Western culture is better. When the children of these immigrants look around them and they see what their parents had left, and they see what their parents are offering them in terms of their control, and they look around themselves and they see what Western culture has and all of the temptations that are there, they're going to fall to those temptations. They're going to fall to those temptations every time, overwhelmingly, and only a few stick around. I mentioned that I was 20 years a Christian. The same thing happens in the church. The pastor's kids and missionaries' kids are some of the wildest motherfuckers out there. They will go out drinking and they would do all kinds of things because they're in an environment that is so limited. I tended to be, because I didn't come from a religious household when I adopted my religion. I was walking into it with my own sense of pursuit and passion, and I tended to be far more strident with myself than these kids who had been brought up in these institutions all their lives. And Western culture just pulled it. Western, the freedom and everything that tempted me away eventually. But that's a whole different story. I have a lot of hope for Europe. I think that it's a passing difficulty that will be surmounted. The Ottoman Empire actively tried to invade. I mean, they for many years, for many several centuries, they tried to invade through Sicily, through the Balkans, through Spain, and it eventually had to stop. They ran out of steam. So I think unless it comes to that, I'm really not even going to be. Even if it does come to that, I'm not going to be concerned. So.
Right there.
Oh, okay.
So in Saudi Arabia, the Prince recently made some strides towards westernization. Do you think it's lip service? Do you think it's actual change, or do you think it's just like fear of not pushing towards that?
I think with that in the Middle East, I think there is a sense that it might be lip service, but there is a tremendous amount of pressure, just because, again, all of the communication possibilities that are available to people worldwide, they can see what Western civilization has to offer. Something has to give.
Right, but there's also the old guard who's going to be a lot of pushback.
Of course, there's going to be a lot of pushback, but they're going to die.
Okay.
Whenever Western civilization is on the menu, the young people will choose it, and that's going to, that's going to be a death knell to those kinds of regimes. It may take some time. It may take a number of, may even take a number of centuries, but it'll get there eventually. I think we had a question over here.
Oh, sorry. I'll get there.
Okay.
All right. I am. I don't want to say an expert, but I focus very heavily on the Middle East and
on what? I'm sorry.
The Middle East.
The Middle East. Okay.
Yes. The current shakeup in Saudi Arabia. There were hundreds of people killed, thousands of people rounded up and beaten with cables, including Ben al-Walid. There's not much of a question, it's just a statement. What is happening right now, as brutal as it is great. It's honestly great news. I've been studying this topic for 20 years, and I don't like my name being known, so thank you.
Oh, thank you. No, there's definitely a shakeup going on, and I think it has to, in some small way, to do with the pressures and the temptations of Western culture. It ties back, and that change will be positive eventually. Unfortunately, people still are resorting to violence, and that's a problem. But again, the problems are solvable. The solutions bring more problems. Those problems are solvable. So we'll get there. We'll get there. Yes.
Hi. Sorry, I think you're being a bit too optimistic about Europe. I lived in Europe up until 5 years ago in London. It's actually getting worse and worse. The birth rate of Europeans is only about 1.6. The Muslim migrants coming in is something like, I think, 3.8 or something like that. The rapes are increasing. Up north of England, there is an epidemic of child gang rape. They're not committed by British people, I've seen the statistics. In London, they've got a Muslim mayor, he's already banned bikini models on posters. It's creeping in.
Because it's exploitive, right?
Yeah, that's what he says. Yeah. And he was actually an ex-lawyer for one of the 9/11 terrorists. Obviously not any of the ones that died, but some of the masterminds. So that's the sort of guy that you are dealing with, and he is the mayor of London, one of the biggest cities in the world. And there is some really bad things happening, and people are just getting silenced, like you saw Count Dankula. He lives in Scotland. And it seems like Sharia law is actually creeping in very slowly, and it's not getting better. I know you want to be optimistic, but
I am optimistic. It's not that I want to be. No, I am very confident. I'm not just optimistic, I'm absolutely confident. And I can appreciate, again, I'm not denying that there are problems. I am not denying, I'm not blind to the fact of the child rape gangs in Bristol and Rotherham and those places. that. I know about the mayor of London, I'm familiar with that. And obviously Count Dankula, but the thing is that there is outrage, and there is still the freedom to express the outrage against those kinds of activities. Not just, and people still do it in England. I mean, not all of them are getting arrested, and across the Western world. The fact that you know, I mean, these kinds of things, that you know, the normalcy of underage sex in the Islamic world, that's a normal thing. In like places like Afghanistan, places like Pakistan, you have children, you know, underage children getting married to, you know, older men, you know, and it's, no one in those countries sees that as a problem, but it is seen as a problem in England and in Europe. And the fact that it can be called a problem by someone, by anyone, is a testament to to Western civilization in general, and to the feeling of Western civilization. It is a problem. I'm not gonna, you know, again, not denying that, but that problem is a problem. And the fact that it's a problem is a good thing. It is a solvable problem, and it will be solved. And the solution will initiate other problems, you know, which in turn will be solvable. So I don't see that as a tide turning. I see that as things are being uprooted, because, you know, those communities, they have kids and they're looking around themselves and seeing the temptations of Western culture. So
I had a question about something you mentioned just a little bit earlier about the children of migrants who come over who are Muslim migrants, and you mentioned assimilation, and I think assimilation is a wonderful thing. It happens all the time. You know, my dad, from Hong Kong, I'm an example of how, you know, children born in the West can become, I think, fully Western. But when we were talking about the children of Muslim migrants, there's actually an entire, almost like, area of study that's dedicated specifically to the radicalization of these homegrown terrorists, these sons and, you know, occasionally daughters who were born in places like Britain, but who still end up becoming radicalized. And in some cases, they actually have a higher instance of radicalization in their parents. So I guess, what do you think is causing that, and what do we do about that if our only kind of tool against this is, oh, they'll assimilate, but it's not always the case.
Right. No, and again, I acknowledge that it's a problem, but the only way that they can do that, the only way that these communities can do that, is to completely isolate their children, and to basically cut them off. You know, and the thing is that they're fundamentalist Christians who do much the same thing. They don't have televisions, they don't have any kind of you know, interaction with the outside world, and that's the only way they can do that, though. That is the, you know, they have to be that controlling. And the problem with that is it can never be complete. It can never be as pervasive as it needs to be in order to prevent leakage. Yes, one or two, or, you know, a number of those children will continue in those traditions, but there will be what's the word that I'm looking for?
Attrition.
Attrition, right. There will be attrition from those ranks. And it's because Western civilization will come up with the temptation that will draw them away. It will happen. And so, you know, as far as a practical solution is concerned, you know, I mean, our institutions, we hold to the rule of law. You know, that's already established. And you know, if we see a problem that inspires creativity, let your creativity go. Let's see, how can we tempt these kids away from that kind of thing? Because obviously, you know, that can cause problems later on, not just in society, but in their own lives. You know, I mean, like I said, I was a part of religious communities that, you know, I've seen religious communities that were that insular, and it messes with people's heads. It's not necessarily a positive thing. So, so there is a sense of you know, giving them some sort of fullness as well.
What about de novos
Right, well, I mean, you go there. You go there, because, there's in a sense, there are no-go zones in the United States. You have street gangs that hold different things, but, I mean, I live in Los Angeles, and, for the most part, you can still, walk down the street, as long as it has to be daylight, you want to be smart about it, but, as long as there is an ability to go.
No, you can't go there.
Okay, but, I mean, what happens if you do? I mean, what is the consequence?
Yeah, right, or kill her.
Well, okay, but what is it? I don't see that happening on a mass, I don't see the crime.
Yeah, if you bring a police vehicle that's marked and it gets lit on fire, that's a super dangerous place.
Unmark the police vehicles. Unmark them.
You mark the police.
I know, you leave them unmarked, and if you see a crime, they come out and
Oh, you have to leave them unmarked because.
That's. I mean, you're asking me for ideas. I'm coming up with ideas.
So let's go. We're gonna go for one more official question. Maybe these comments will be baked into it. We don't know. And and then Michael will be available for a beer afterwards.
There's one more. I'm sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay.
Maybe the angle.
All right, thank you. Good talk, thanks for optimism. I would like to know if the ideas of Western civilization that you value, liberalism, openness, individualism, do you think these ideas would be strong if the white race in Europe goes extinct?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Because everywhere these Western ideas establish themselves, they flourish. Look at Singapore. That's not a white European.
But that's westernization.
That's westernization.
That's westernization. Mm-hmm. Western civilization, white European men
Ideas
created these ideas that you adhere most, that most people in this room adhere and uphold most seriously. And without, and since the white population is slowly going extinct, what offer do you have besides simply, hope for the better? I mean, what use is optimism? What use is individualism if the group of people coming in to Europe, supposedly assimilating to Western civilization, are simply not interested fundamentally with the ideas that we uphold? How do we assimilate people who are fundamentally against what we believe in? And the second part of that question, what use is individualism for the whites in South Africa?
Well, individualism is better. I mean, it's objectively the case. Good ideas, awesome ideas don't have that component. Don't have a racial component. And so people are going to adopt better ideas. You look at Taiwan, look at South Korea. You don't have to look at Japan. Japan is a triumph. Okay, look at China. China is completely transforming. Look at India. Millions of people rising out of poverty. These ideas are better. These ideas are better. Look, there is no genocide outside of state-sponsored genocide going on in Southern Africa. I would acknowledge that. But when people rise to a certain income level, their birth rates drop. It doesn't matter.
And that's how realistic how.
That's just the way things go. That's just the way human beings
So
behave.
are you saying it's okay for the white race to go extinct?
They're not going extinct.
Is it okay for
They're not going extinct.
Okay, so
They are not going extinct.
thank you so much, and let's give a big round of applause to Michael. Share ideas. Thank you so much. So we're gonna literally take a 2-5 whatever minute. Just grab some water because it's hot apparently. And then we're going to have Rucka on stage discussing intersectionality. So thank you, everyone.
There will always be those outliers, but overall, yeah, I mean, we're going to choose individuality and creativity because it's better. I did see that, yes. It's the same, yeah, it's very similar, just the basic reason. So, yeah, actually, I did see that. Right, exactly. Because yeah. It was like, what is this? And it was so infectious, and so inspiring.
Everybody's saying like, no,
I think that you know, I mean, it's natural for people to want to have safety, and then there's also a natural inclination for that desire for safety that people have to exploit it for their own ends. And you know, but after time people get burned out. You know, if you're constantly looking for that safe space or whatever, you know, it just burns up so much energy. You get burnt out.
It does seem to go in phases. Like right now, there's a positive kind of fading.
It's
trying to keep us alive, and it was forced on me.
And it's right, and it's just so much energy, and you know, you can see, especially elements of like the progressive left, they're getting smaller and smaller because they're consuming themselves with purity tests. You know, it's like purity, and people aren't going to give that to them.
The university is unfortunately, I don't think you can say that about the media. The media is like,
they're institutional.
Social justice light,
right?
And that, you know, they're very pervasive. Yeah, they pretend to have an open mind. They pretend to present more than one side.
And you know, and they are the institutional, you know, they're an institutional power, and they are infected with this, you know, kind of a version of the ideology. But again, it's just consumes so much energy. It's too expensive.
I understand.
Ultimately, you know.
I like your optimism. Congratulations on getting me the right question.
Right. Yeah, I was wondering if I was going to.
Well, I thought of a great.
Okay, guys, this is Roger here. I want to let you know. I thought that last bit there, the last 10 minutes of that little escapade there was awesome. That's what I thought Kilroy was initially going to be about. So Michael Guthrie delivered, the audience delivered on that. Hey, what's up, guys? What's up, just me? What's up, everybody?
Oh, absolutely.
Number 0. It comes from
So yeah, this one was, this to me, it seems like it's kind of like the highlight of the whole event so far. This is what I was expecting the whole time. Hey, John Stewart from England. Let's see here, get us a count, Roger. I'd probably say it's about 50-ish people. Well, I'm not gonna say I like the whole thing. I'm just saying that that little 10-minute spot is like where they were both debating with the audience was a pretty big highlight for me. So say hi to. Anyway, what does that say? Say hi to me. Say my name. Do it. Kevin Wall. Right on. Hey, Roger. Well done for hanging in there. Yeah, no problem, man. I appreciate you guys hanging in there too. Roger is Toad. I'm assuming this is gonna be a meme now or something. I don't know who this Toad is. I'm probably a joke of this right now, so it's funny. I think it's awesome. Go ahead and make some memes, people. That'd be pretty badass.
This is actually
Roger. I know the guy in the red hat. Oh, the one that was kind of being part of Kilroy, actually going into the spirit of what it was. He was kind of all over the place, you know, talking out of turn and stuff. That was totally cool, in my opinion. Because it's kind of like just trying to keep your ground there. Roger, turn on Super Chat. I'm on my... Oh, okay, let me see if I could do that. My phone just says, show live chat and hide all live chat messages. What does the Super Chat button look like? There's a button over here. I feel like if I press it, I'm going to go ahead and press it. So if I disconnect people, I'm sorry. 1 second.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for coming. I am grateful for everyone.
No, that's background, like bubbles and glamour and beam. No, I don't need that shit. Sorry, guys, I don't know how to do that. Let's see here. You don't have enough subs to get Super Chats. Yeah, that's what I figured. So, goodbye, Roger. See ya, Violent Science. Thank you for joining in. Roger listens to the people's Super Chats. I wish it worked that way, Roman. Thank you, man. You need 1,000K subs to Super Chat now. I think that's the number. I think that's what it said in my settings. I think you're right. I'm halfway there, I think. You gotta do it through your creator studio. Yeah, it says that when I... Oh, you know what? I'm gonna check on my other phone if I keep... Oh, wait. Creator Studio is not available on the app. It probably is. I just don't know how to get to it. Toad on the road. Do it for your next stream. I did bring my laptop with me, but the next stream is in a couple minutes. My laptop is probably about 15 minutes away in my truck.
It's the medium.
I'll do it probably like after lunch for sure. I will make that attempt, okay? I appreciate that, guys. Thanks for the suggestion. I think you need 1,000 subs for Super Chat. Could I be wrong? Over of Acorns, I think that it is 1,000, and so I will attempt it. I'll look and see if I have that capability. If I don't, I'll let you guys know. Tap the guy with the white hat on the shoulder and say, I found you, scrub. No. You guys. You guys. Pretty clever of Toad pretending not to be Toad. You guys. Roger, please tell Jeff he reeks of bologna. Baba Yoga. I can't smell anything on here, so I'll tell him. No. Let's see here. Roger, you can't turn on Super Chats until you hit 1,000 subs. Thank you, Thomas. That does save me a little bit of time. One thing I do want to be ready for is coming back for watching Mundane Matt's How to Survive. What is this? It's called... I don't know if you guys can see that. It's at... let's see here.
They try to do that, you know, with like...
There it is. 1:45 p.m. Staying alive on social media, Matt Mundane. So I'm going to be watching that. And I think you guys already know that there was a little bit of something said about me kind of being a liar about my experience on Friday. You know, that's basically Matt outright said that in his video. I don't normally give a rat's ass about stupid commentary like that, but I just wanted to address that he didn't have the facts, and I relayed the facts, and I can still relay them more. I just want to get my point across on that. So, such a small, trivial issue. You know, I'm here trying to point out the positive lights and the negative lights of the event, so that way, you know, whether they want to continue with this or not, it's going to be their discretion. You don't make advancements when you don't want to know your weaknesses. So that's why I'm doing all this. Roger, sing Ram Ranch. Ram Ranch. I don't know what that is. I hope that little tune there was enough, Tom. Let's see. Great Streamlabs. Get Streamlabs. Do text-to-speech. Let Kilroy know what viewers have to say. Hey, you guys, I'm going to stop talking. It looks like we're going to have another speaker here. Thank you guys for sticking in, and share this link if you can. We'll talk to you soon.
Up next, we have a famed YouTube personality.
Thanks. I'll be around.
Over a billion downloads, quarter billion views. He is an amazing satirist, rapper, mixes comedy with political and social commentary. And today he will be talking about intersectionality, property rights. welcome Rucka. Hey guys, I am the artist known as Rucka Ali. Free speech is, I've enjoyed it in my own career, some would say a bit too much. And if there was a conference making the case against free speech, I think there's a good chance I would be invited as an example of what might go wrong. Now, I'm going to be delivering a lecture titled Intersectionality, Free Speech and Property. Some of the opinions expressed might not be your opinion. We will have plenty of time for a Q&A, and I invite you, please stick around and you'll have your chance to nail me to a cross, which is how I'm treated every single day. All right, here we go. Let's go on a little journey, shall we? Intersectionality, free speech, and property. Around 7 months ago, I drove from my home in Los Angeles up to Oakland, California to attend the long-planned Free Speech Week event at UC Berkeley, which was to feature several controversial political pundits with keynote speaker and organizer, conservative loudmouth Milo Yiannopoulos. My decision to attend Free Speech Week was very last minute and was not for a reason one might expect. It was not because I consider Milo to be an ally in the cause for preserving free speech. I don't. More on that later. And the reason for my attendance was not because I care who's permitted to speak at UC Berkeley. I don't. More on that later. I drove up to Oakland at the invitation of my good friend and fellow intellectual traveler, a British YouTube sensation known as Sargon of Akkad. Any Sargon fans here? Sargon wanted to be here, but he didn't want to be here. Sargon had recently read a book I had given him called The Ominous Parallels. I was eager to discuss the book with him, presumably over one of his gay little live stream broadcasts. But upon my contacting him on a sunny Saturday morning, Sargon said, "Oh, I'm actually in the Bay Area for the weekend. This is my little sister's graduation party. We ain't gonna be having any bullshit." As he spoke, I wondered if Antifa would show up and how they might respond to the demands of this black gentleman. Would they respect his wishes and take their protest elsewhere? Or would they stay put, clench their baseball bats, and express what they mean by any means necessary? We assured the man that we meant no harm and would cause no commotion, and he returned to his engagement in the middle of the park. Sargon, myself, and several others sat down in a shady area and waited to see if anyone else might arrive. As we sat, I turned to Sargon and said, "Hey Sargon, you have some great advice for the black community. Why don't you go talk to them about that?" He replied, No, that's all right, I'll just stay put." Confused by his reluctance to open dialogue, I tried again. "But Sargon, you have so much to say about problems that ail the black community and the solutions they need. Why don't you walk over there and tell them to focus on family and education? I bet they'd appreciate the advice." No, I'd rather not," he said with no further explanation. "But Sargon, you talk so much about this online. Why don't you go over there and help them out?" Suddenly, Sargon pointed at the phone in my hand and said, "Why don't you go show them one of your videos, Rucka?" Grasping Sargon's point, I grew immediately quiet. Although the remainder of Free Speech Week was a total non-event, the story I just told raises some interesting questions on the topic of free speech. Consider the complexity of a semi-publicly funded university regulating the booking of invited speakers, being faced with student protests, as well as the internal biases of the faculty, as well as the once sacred oath to encourage vigorous debate on campus, as well as counter-protests by more students, as well as the outburst of violence, leading the administration to need to spend 6 figures per event on hired security. Now, consider the complex dynamic of multiple parties wishing to utilize a public park for their planned activities, some of which include expression, some of which might include violent protests, and some of which resort to verbal intimidation, and the implied hint of violence to settle the clash of interests. And of course, my discussion with Sargon brings about the topic of a certain type of speech, which may arouse an incident at public parks, but which is totally harmless and perfectly acceptable on the internet. Whatever lessons you might extract from the story, I believe it demonstrates the main thesis of my lecture today. If the story I just told teaches us one thing, and I do mean one thing, it's that the one true impediment to free speech is the threat of force. I'm going to drive home 3 main points. Point number 1, philosophical ideas shape a person and drive his actions, and therefore shape the culture at large. Point number 2,
The political protection of rights is the result of philosophical trends and philosophical developments in history. Point number 3, and this might be the hardest sell for some of you. The absolute right to free speech goes hand in hand with the absolute right to your own property. And if you compromise on one, you are sacrificing both, and will be able to enjoy neither. This remains true no matter how rich you are, how influential you might be, and how inconvenient your property rights may be deemed by others. Let's talk about point number 1, which is actually a pretty controversial thing to say these days. Philosophical ideas shape people and cultures. Now, to be clear, I'm not picking a side of the deterministic nature versus nurture debate. I'm saying that both nature and nurture fall by the wayside when a person chooses to focus on, consider, and agree with philosophic principles. This then drives the person's subsequent actions, and if enough people follow suit, said philosophic principles morph the culture over time. In the words of Leonard Peikoff, author of The Ominous Parallels, ideas are the motor of history. I'm guessing that much of this audience is familiar with postmodernism, at least by name. It's often mentioned by free speech advocate Jordan Peterson, as well as many others, as the ideological force destroying our culture. Well, how the hell can an abstract ideology cause anyone to do anything in concrete reality? Well, we've seen how. Picture this, a college student of postmodern thought, and I use the word thought somewhat ironically. A college student of postmodern thought, typically a young adult, sits in a classroom and is taught by a trusted professor that his mind is useless, that reality is unknowable, and that reason is impotent. If the student chooses to scrutinize this ideology of postmodernism, he can reject it and seek for better ideas. Some students do. If, however, the student takes his professor at his word, shrugs off the responsibility of thinking, labels reason as an outdated, old-fashioned superstition of the long-forgotten Enlightenment, and rejects objective reality altogether, he is now a blank canvas to be painted on by anyone and everyone that chooses to paint his world. You're driven by your racial concerns, he may be told. You're an agent of your economic class, another voice might tell him. You're an oppressor, and you're oppressed, and there's an invisible system in place controlling us all, is another message he may receive, and will have surrendered the ability to evaluate before accepting. With no confidence in his own ability to think, the horrified student has several choices before him. He might turn to a life of hedonism, following his raw emotions towards gratuitous bomb rips and excessive eating, indulging in depraved entertainment and posting self-contradictory skeptic nonsense on Reddit, wasting his life away with nothing to show for it but a rich, healthy beard around his neck, existing as a near vegetable, in evasion of the one obvious question. If reality isn't real, and if reason is of no use, then who the fuck was able to create this computer feeding me an endless supply of pornography? That's one course of action the student might take. Alternately, the student of postmodernism might delegate his course of action to the group. If I'm unable to reason, he reasons, I better follow the others and spring into action. The purpose of said action? That may vary, but the one we've seen in recent years is the pursuit of social justice, galvanizing every form of oppressed group and fighting to bring down the straight, white, rich, able-bodied patriarchy. Among the infinite questions the student avoids confronting, the most glaring should be, if the mind doesn't think and everything is uncertain, then how in blazes does my professor know what he's teaching me? At this point, the student can't even think that far. It's important to point out, the student can and should question the drivel he's being taught. He has that choice. Simply using his independent rational faculty to challenge his professor and point out that the emperor has no clothes would enable him to live the rest of his life as a coherent human being. But oftentimes, the student found in this situation accepts what he's being taught. In his defense, he typically doesn't see a more rational option on the menu. The crime of the centuries has been, and is, being committed by the high-level intellectuals peddling this shit down to the rest of us. But this is the power of ideas. This is the role of philosophy in a man's life, and therefore in a culture. A human being must use reason to live. And if he surrenders his mind, all he has left to follow are his feelings or the group. Feelings or the group. Feelings or
The group.
And we see the result of postmodernism in our culture today. On the group side of this split are the social justice warriors. On the feeling side of this dichotomy are some of the compulsive, alcoholic, homebody keyboard warriors that ridicule the SJWs and think they're making fun of postmodernism while accepting its premises. And it isn't long before the SJWs are indulging their feelings in blind fits of rage, and the basement dwellers are forming groups of their own, tribes of the oppressed neckbeards, behaving sometimes like the very mob they set out to destroy. Feelings and the group, that's what's left when reason has been abandoned. I'll give another quick example of philosophy driving people's actions and shaping a culture. Karl Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto. 100 million people were killed in the name of the glorious future of the proletariat. What made Eastern Europe ripe for Marx's ideas is the influence of a long tradition of modern philosophers, which I don't currently have the time nor the needed preparation to illustrate. But if ever there was blatant evidence of an idea bringing about human action, I think communism makes a fairly compelling case. A man, to think, must live. And a woman, I guess. A woman actually came up with that quote, but we'll get there in a few. A man to live must think. Which brings us to my second main point. Philosophy gave us the political protection of the right to free speech. You'll notice I didn't say philosophy gave us the right to free speech. That right was already there, as I'll explain in a moment. I said philosophy gave us the political protection of the right to free speech, which takes longer to say, but is important to say. Why is this transparent? I'm playing with myself right now.
So we can see the tabs.
Thanks, Mama. Hey. Towards the end of the Renaissance, Francis Bacon famously said, "Nature, to be commanded, must be obeyed." There are certain rules of nature, and a man must recognize and abide by them in order to make his way in the world. Now, you might say, yeah, no shit, so what? I'll tell you so what. This was Europe crawling out of the Dark Ages. This was a groundbreaking statement. The world can be adjusted and transformed, and the tool for doing so is reason. John Locke, a 17th century philosopher, pointed out that man has certain natural rights. That is, men are equally free in the eyes of nature, and so no king has a legitimate claim over them. Again, you might say, whoop-de-doo, everyone knows kings are stupid. Well, for one thing, I was recently in England, and they still have one. He's just waiting for his mother to die. But that's not the point. The point is this. Times were changing. Thinkers were coming up with theories of political freedom and individual rights. This was the age of the Enlightenment, a time before postmodernism and modernism and all that bullshit. I call it the good old days. The Enlightenment thinkers were not perfect. They were often wrong, and at times it can look like for every step in the right direction, the philosophers took 2 steps back. But they were trying. There was widespread respect for reason, a lot of confusion about how to use reason and how to apply reason to practical reality, but the philosophers at the time properly recognized reason as the tool for understanding the world. Does that sound like the garbage students study in school today? Does that sound like postmodernism? Do you imagine a student during the Enlightenment sat in school learning that his mind can't think and that reality is a distant mystery? Fuck that. These men were exiting a dark age. They had no interest in bringing about another one. So while their understanding of reason was often flawed, they recognized its importance and strived to understand it further. And the Enlightenment thinkers were using their minds to figure out the proper political system for men to live in. Early understandings of the source of man's rights were flawed. Essentially, John Locke was saying that men have rights because nobody can legitimately violate them. Rights come from God, said Locke. I think he was on the right path, but I'll offer a better source for rights in just a moment. Thomas Paine, some decades later, popularized the idea of natural rights right here on American soil. The Founding Fathers declared their independence from King George, taking up arms in the name of resisting the illegitimate rule of a monarch over the individual. This revolutionary idea of men's rights was now motivating a bloody revolution. Anyone who doubts the influence of philosophy on a man's actions certainly isn't storming America's pastures in the 1770s, firing a musket at a charging army of Sargons running down the hill. The American Founding Fathers recognized the right of every individual to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is a slight revision of John Locke's life, liberty, and property. I've heard it speculated that Thomas Jefferson removed property from the list of rights in order to weaken the South's case for slavery. Whether that's true or not, I just wish he kept the word property in there and maybe added except for slavery. Nonetheless, the explicit right to one's own life and the liberty to act freely is what made the USA remarkable. This was the first time a country was founded based on philosophical values as opposed to brute force and tribal conquest. This was the first time a government was subjugated by the individual, tasked with protecting his inalienable rights rather than granting them to him. Hey, bass mama. Just kidding. I'm just saying, hey. At this point, we've seen that philosophy influences personal decision, which in turn influences culture. We've also seen that political protection of individual rights came from the Enlightenment philosophers and their quest to apply reason to reality. Now, to my third main point. The right to free speech and the right to one's own property are both absolute. What this means is that you can say whatever you wish and do what you wish with your own property. Just as nobody may censor you, nobody may force himself onto your property or confiscate what's yours. Your rights don't vanish when your speech is offensive, and your rights aren't called into question if your property is enormous. To demonstrate how these rights intersect, you have free speech on your own property. You're not entitled to speak in someone else's home without their consent, or in someone else's place of business, or on someone else's forum, big or small. And nobody is entitled to speak on your property without your consent. As far as the specific issue of speakers at universities, all universities, including UC Berkeley, should be privately owned and funded, receiving no tax dollars, and the permission to speak on campus ought to come exclusively from the university itself. And this is not simply my prescription for successful society or my personal wish for political order. Rather, the absolute inalienable rights to speech and property are extensions of the right to think and the right to act. Rights in this respect are more than simply man's default abilities in his naked state of nature. Rights are his requirements for living. The expositor of this view is my favorite philosopher, the highly controversial and sometimes misunderstood author of The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand. She was revolutionary in every branch of philosophy. In the realm of knowledge, Rand revived the supremacy of reason, a tool of knowledge scoffed at by modern philosophers, and she effectively solved the mind versus body dichotomy that had baffled Enlightenment philosophers for centuries. When it came to ethics, she challenged the conventional morality of altruism in its various religious and secular forms, and she prescribed a code of ethics conducive to the individual's survival and personal flourishing, enabling him to pursue success with moral confidence rather than with ever-increasing guilt. In order to live, every living being pursues certain values. The plant pursues sunlight. The bird pursues worms. The turtle pursues pizza. Like all animals, humans require certain actions to attain our needed values. But unlike the other creatures, human action is not automatic. A human being to live must think. A human being must choose to live and must use reason. Ayn Rand identified reason as the basic tool of survival, and she noted that reason is a function of the individual. If every individual must use reason to live, then thinking freely is a requirement for his survival. And since a man must act in order to stay alive, then freedom of action is man's other fundamental right. Hence, freedom to think and freedom to act are man's two fundamental rights derived from his nature. A proper political system, then, is one that protects an individual's rights to think and act freely. That protection means extracting force from the realm of human affairs so that people can live at peace and trade voluntarily. Therefore, the purpose of a proper government is to arbitrate disputes, fend off foreign aggressors, and arrest criminals. The individual is left to think for himself, to act for himself, and to pursue his own happiness, should he choose to do so. The right to think entails the right to speak, and the right to act entails the right to produce, own, and dispose of one's own property. These rights are requirements for human existence, and to violate them is to impede on an individual's ability to survive. Both of these rights, speech and property, are absolute, in accordance with human nature. There's no such thing as violating them slightly. There are only the options of violating or respecting rights. The United States... Let me take a sip right now. The United States has a fairly impressive record of protecting the individual's right to free speech. This was true with regard to property rights as well for the first century or so of America's history. But today, when it comes to your own property, the government tells you what you may do with it, how much of it you may keep, what you must let others do on it, and you're expected to be grateful and apologetic if they let you keep a scrap of what's yours. Of course, in a representative democracy such as ours, the government is simply reflecting the philosophical values of the culture they represent. A clear example of this could be seen just last week, as Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg appeared before Congress for a session of questioning. In a ruthless act of public shaming of the industrial giant, a handful of despicable, power-lusting scumbag politicians grilled Zuckerberg on the inner dealings of his private company. These congressmen and senators, these lethargic, lifeless hacks, none of whom have probably created a penny of wealth in their lives, could barely conceal their boners as they demanded answers from this private citizen in preparation for their very likely upcoming draft of legislation imposing regulations on Facebook. Around the country, Americans watch the congressional proceedings via live stream, mostly on Facebook Live, salivating neurotically at the taming of this billionaire by their elected officials. The American people, none of whom have ever been forced to use Facebook, and all of whom have been offered the free service of connecting with friends and family at the tap of a screen, of consuming endless free entertainment around the clock, and of watching their childhood friends procreating and gaining weight, suspended all context of the situation to celebrate the revenge of the people at this greedy individual social media tycoon. Now, let's be clear. The impending government regulation of Facebook will cement Facebook as a virtual social media monopoly, locking out competitors and making it all but impossible to create a viable alternative. Like all government regulation of private business, it will strengthen the relationship between big business and Washington, D.C., and increase the reciprocal flow of favors between government and industry. But in the land of the begrudgingly free, and certainly no longer brave, the land of the envious and cynical and short-sighted, the emotionally driven public is more than happy to risk a bleak future if that means the selfish Facebook mogul Mark Zuckerberg gets a leash wrapped around his pale little neck. Indeed, in our culture today, we have little to no respect for property rights, and we especially mock the very concept of the rich, successful businessman having any goddamn rights at all. The way we seem to view the businessman, he's here to serve us. We allow him to keep some of his money, for which he'd better be humble. He apparently was born to provide the rest of us with services and handouts. And his property is only his by favor. I will pose that that is bullshit. And additionally, the more we violate the property rights of others, the faster we're going to lose our own rights, including free speech. Time for a sip. When I was a little boy, the political left were reliable defenders of free expression, but they were usually the first to advocate for increased taxation of income and regulation of economic activity. Calls for censorship came mostly from conservatives, the moral arbiters of society and self-proclaimed defenders of liberty, at least liberty which doesn't conflict with family values or the Judeo-Christian tradition. Today, the left leads the way in the suppression of free speech. They must have realized that to control speech is to control the mind, and without his mind, man is all but ready to follow orders. And many of today's conservatives, in typical retro fashion, in typical late-to-the-party, unintentional irony, seem to think they can engineer society to their liking by seizing the means of production, or more accurately, the means of communication. Fox News pundit Tucker Carlson is currently rooting for the government regulation of Facebook, lest anyone confuse him for a friend of capitalism. In a segment titled Tech Tyranny, Carlson reacted to the recent Zuckerberg appearance in Congress by asking Republican Senator John Kennedy, "So here you've got the biggest provider of news in the United States, with the long and proven track record of censorship in this country, with the power to change election results. If you think too much power is invested in one company, and they're in effect enemies of the First Amendment, I know Republicans don't like regulating things, but do you think we're approaching the point where, for the good of the public, that may need to be done?" End quote. Notice the implication that Facebook's property rights are reliant on the so-called good of the public. Also note the use of the word censorship and the phrase enemies of the First Amendment. Censorship is, in fact, an act of force. Facebook, no matter how popular, is not forcing anybody to do anything. You don't need to use Facebook. Your life does not require Facebook. Your life does require property rights. Zuckerberg does not have the power to silence anybody. He can only prevent them from speaking on his own website. Does Tucker Carlson afford to Facebook the same property rights as he enjoys in his own home or on his news program? Censorship, again, is force, and only the government can censor. Tucker seems real cool with the idea of the government applying force to Zuckerberg's private business. There are, unfortunately, countless other examples of current-day conservatives advocating for government neutralization of political speech on Facebook. To save time and spare myself the nausea, I won't try to go through them all. I will quote for you the aforementioned larger-than-life conservative crazy fuck Milo Yiannopoulos. In his 2017 self-published, self-congratulatory page-turner book, Dangerous, Milo suggests a game plan for defeating the alleged censorship by social media. If conservatives, including President Trump, want to avoid disaster, they need to get serious about pressuring Silicon Valley to stay honest. They should raise the specter of antitrust, media regulation, and all the other regulatory demons feared by America's social media companies, who have many legal and financial reasons for wanting to remain classified by the courts as politically neutral platforms, even though everyone knows they're not. How edgy. Did you know conservatism is the new punk? Sadly it is, but not for the reasons they think. At least we have Ben Shapiro, the property rights hawk, the conservatarian, the no-nonsense, facts don't care about your feelings man of principle. Surely Ben Shapiro is speaking up in the defense of the private companies that are big social media. Let's find out. In response to the massive lynch mob against Zuckerberg, Ben Shapiro said the following on his podcast. There were a couple of people that actually went after Zuckerberg on matters that actually do matter. Okay, so there are really a couple of matters that are really serious. One is the amount of political bias at Facebook, but the political bias of the people that are actually implementing and writing the algorithms. And the other thing that's really important is whether Facebook is a platform or whether Facebook is a publisher. Am I on Planet of the Apes? Ben, somebody's property rights are being violated. Mark Zuckerberg created a company. He actually dedicated his life to it. And he's sitting in Congress with a room full of guns pointed at him, which is exactly what the government is. And fucking boy genius over here. Is it a platform or a motherfucker? Does Mark Zuckerberg need to invent Facebook inside of his mother's womb for Ben Shapiro to recognize his goddamn rights? You guys are cool. Alright, one more sip.
No, you're cool, man. Thank you. It's true.
The pinnacle of the conservative war on property rights came in late 2017 when PragerU, a popular conservative YouTube channel, filed suit against YouTube's parent company, Google, for alleged censorship of its content and, in the words of PragerU's website, discriminating against its right to freedom of speech. If my position is still unclear, let me tell you how Google should be treated by the government. Google should receive no special favors, no subsidies, no grants, nothing except the protection that the government should provide to every citizen and his property. As far as Google and YouTube's behavior, it's really not my decision to make for them. YouTube is free to restrict, demonetize, or delete videos, and if they so desire, delete entire channels. I personally am famous for being the victim of all of those. If you ask someone in the street, hey, you ever heard of Rucka Rucka? He'll either say no, or yeah, Rucka's the guy that YouTube deleted. I'm the most deleted person in history. Like, me and YouTube have had our differences, all right? I don't always like YouTube, but their website belongs to them. To forcefully violate their property rights is to introduce force into the realm of human affairs. And that's to forfeit all rights. And practically speaking, this is only going to lead to further government involvement in the internet, which ultimately is moving us closer to the day when the internet is practically owned and run by Uncle Sam. To put it in a way that the kids can understand, you will lose your means. My friends, if we're going to preserve free speech, we need to understand the principle it rests on. Speech is an expression of thought, which takes place in the mind. And I'm saying property is a consequence of action, which is carried out by the body. There's presently widespread support for the right to speak, a function related to the mind, but not as much enthusiasm around the right to one's own property, a function related to the body. Since we're not floating ghosts, since our minds are contained within our bodies, then in order to live on earth, we need to preserve and protect both our right to think and our right to act, both our right to speak and the right to control our own property. And I'll leave you with a quote by me. I recently partook in a free speech panel in London with Sargon and with convicted YouTuber Count Dankula. I said something which really sums up my approach to the cultural shift of the past few years. And I quote, "I'd love to sit here and just bash the left all day. But unfortunately, what you get with me is someone who just can't seem to leave it there." End quote. Thank you.
All right. Question time.
Raise your hand if you've got a question. All right.
Right, you gotta turn it on.
Lights on.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I didn't really agree with you. How would you feel if Facebook decided to censor minorities like African Americans or Hispanic? Why is it okay that they can censor conservatives? And banks are regulated, and that's for the protection of us. Why is our free speech, that is conservatives, being suppressed by a private company? Why do they have the right to do that?
Because it's their company.
They are the only social media site, they're the main social media site, and Google is pretty much a monopoly, as Tucker Carlson have said. I can't download any apps without Google Play, so I don't have a choice of any other company. And why should they be allowed to censor the people that they want to censor? And they are discriminating, they're prejudiced.
So, because I believe in private property as an absolute.
I believe in it too.
Can I finish? I'm sorry. Because I believe in property rights as an absolute, if a company wants to discriminate against African Americans or against conservatives, they do have that right, just as you can choose who enters your home.
They might have that right, but can you imagine the outcry if they did that to
I'm all for the outcry. I support the outcry. What I don't support is force. I don't support pointing a gun at these businessmen.
And what if we just said that about banks? We don't regulate the banks at all.
I would
Imagine
like to
what they
deregulate
do.
banks. I think most of the financial problems we've had came from the reciprocal flow of favors between banks and government, and the more the government regulates banks, the more, the less free our economy is, and the more corruption ensues.
Well, our banks in Australia are quite heavily regulated, and we were the only country in the whole Western world that didn't suffer from the recession. And that's because we have very strong banks.
I don't know enough about Australia's banking system, but I do know that here in the U.S., the financial sector is not only the most heavily regulated, but also the most hated. Culturally, we hate bankers, which is basically a medieval thing carried over. The Jews used to be the bankers. And people hate bankers for philosophic reasons. We hate bankers because they think abstractly, they plan long term, they loan out money, and then they get interest, and that's the most. It's an intellectual thing. I know that sounds like I'm going off in all different directions, but in America, bankers are the most financiers are the most regulated people, the most regulated sector of the economy is the finance industry. The big banks have bureaucrats with their own offices set up in their buildings. The government and the banks are basically one and the same at this point, and I'm saying let the banks earn what they can earn by their own merit, and nobody needs to borrow money from them. Nobody needs to store their money in any particular bank. I do believe in capitalism. I believe capitalism made Australia the comfortable place it is to live today. I believe capitalism is what made America the wonderful place that it is and could still be. But as I tried to explain in my lecture, this all came from philosophy. This came from philosophers saying you have certain rights. John Locke in the 1600s didn't know that we would have all this technology. He was only saying you have the right to your own body and your own property and the right to speak. Who could have predicted the Industrial Revolution? People set free created wonderful things, and I think the bigger society gets, as in the more technology we have, the bigger people's properties get, the more crucial it is that we protect their rights. The more crucial it is that we understand where one man's rights, one man's property ends and another's begins. So I'm probably not going to be able to convince you to deregulate the banks, but to answer your question, I don't agree with the premise that regulating the banks is what keeps them afloat or that what keeps us from having a crazy amount of crises. So I guess that's, and as far as discrimination goes, in a free society, a society that I would like to see based on the rights that I uphold, a business is welcome to censor, so to speak. It's not real censorship because they're not using force. They can discriminate if they wish to. The rest of us can boycott them. The rest of us can offer alternate services. And I do believe ultimately that works a hell of a lot better than handing it all over to the government. Bunty?
We're here for the next one.
Oh, okay.
Oh, thanks. Hi. I wanted to kind of chime in on that because that seems like, oh, I'm sorry. Wow, it's like kissing it. I wanted to chime in on your comment. I wanted to add that I'm a proponent for no regulation. If Facebook wants to censor anybody that they want to, minorities, me as a Mexican, blacks, people of a different religion or whatever, they have every right to do so. What that ends up doing is it ends up transitioning people to move from one other area. What's that? Oh. It ends up having an opportunity for other businesses, for other startups to actually take over this area. We don't have to be forcing these corporations, these businesses to do things that they don't want to. I'm a gay man, and I personally don't. I don't normally like to call it out like that, but I'm saying it for a reason. I don't believe that businesses should be forced to serve me. If somebody wants to not serve me and refuse service for that reason, I can do whatever I need to outside of that and say, okay, that's fine. I'm gonna go post it on Yelp. I'm gonna go post it on Google. I'll post my experience on YouTube, and then let the economy, let the people decide if they actually want to associate with that or not. Again, it just builds room for advancement all the time. When we have to force people to do things, it doesn't work. It's more control. So that's you're right. I mean, lose control. For the individual to have their own freedom to do what they want is like what I feel is sensible. It's just that was just it. I just wanted to add on to that.
And can I say, like, if you want to hear the case made for free markets and for absolute property rights, probably someone else can do a better job than me at making that case and get someone from a libertarian think tank to do that. I'm not here to sell libertarianism, the political system. I'm talking about Ayn Rand's philosophy. I'm talking about metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. I'm saying a person to live must think and must be free to do so. A person to live must also act on his actions and must be free to do so. And those rights don't go away unless he violates someone else's rights. So that doesn't, whether you own a hut or whether you own the biggest bank or anything in between, your rights don't go away. And I do believe if we protect those rights absolutely, the world would be we could be living like the Jetsons. But again, I'm not the best person to sell economic freedom. I'm trying to make the point that ideas are the motor of history. I would recommend the book The Ominous Parallels that I quoted. I gave that book to Sargon, and it seemed to impact him for a little while before he forgot everything he read. Dimitri Kapatari.
I hate to beat a dead horse.
You gotta speak in the mic.
You gotta speak on. Testing. Hello. I take extreme issue with the moral absolute that property rights are unlimited. And I can approach this several ways. I know you're using it specifically for Facebook, but the example I like to use is water rights in the United States, where large farmers or ranchers were able to own property that the river ran through. He was able to shut the water supply off and basically kill off all the other farmers below him on the waterway. I just don't see how absolute property rights is even possible unless you're living on an infinite planet where there's enough land for everybody to have as much as they want.
So, can you see how excited I am? Like, can you see my legs over here uncontrollably? Sort of like, the reason I'm so thrilled is that I got to put you in an uncomfortable conundrum, because we're all here saying that free speech is an absolute right, no matter what you say. And then I'm saying, yeah, and same with property rights. And now I'm hearing all these arguments from, yeah, but property rights taken to their extreme could be problematic. I just love that, because, you know, that's what the left or whoever it is, the right now in many cases as well, or historically, whoever it is who's making the case against free speech, these are the same arguments they make. They either point to these particular scenarios, hypothetical or a freak scenario that happened. I'm not familiar with what you mentioned about the farmer. I know farming historically is the most heavily subsidized sector of the economy and should not be. I don't believe in any subsidies, because what subsidies are taking one man's money away, his property, and distributing it. I don't believe in that. I don't believe it works, but I believe it's immoral. I believe the proper ethics say that you have a right to your own life and should act in your own interest. But you mentioned, yeah, I don't remember the last point.
Well, I just think it's untenable. I think absolute property rights just cannot function on a limited planet. I mean, eventually, anybody who's played a game of Monopoly knows the way the game ends.
I don't think the game of Monopoly or a board game like that represents how trade actually works. So actual trade creates more money. It creates an abundance. It's not a no sum game. There's not a finite amount of money out there, and it's just a question of who gets how we split it up.
Well, on a smaller scale, there is a finite amount of land available.
Well, I will actually point out that if you fly over this country, it's mostly empty. The government owns most of this continent, which is fucking ridiculous. The government owns this whole country, and nobody's allowed to do anything on it. I would like to irrigate water into the desert and grow some grass. I would like to have a Phoenix outside of Phoenix. I would like to have a Las Vegas next to Las Vegas. I would like to live on this planet and think and act. So we're not allowed, we've got so much land that we're not using, and we could be building cities on top of cities. The sky's the limit, quite literally. The sky's not even the limit. I'm not to sound like some crazy internet people, but we could be in space.
I can certainly agree with you that the government has been limiting a lot of our expansion and wealth creation and all of that. However, as communism is generally deemed as a failure everywhere it's tried, I would argue that unlimited capitalism, unlimited property rights, has also been a social failure in nearly every place it's been tried. The best system seems to be this moderated capitalism that the United States has and most Western nations has.
I think it's a disaster. The mixed economy brings about horrible problems, and it also will lead to catastrophe. We're going to lose our rights, as we can see, because we don't believe in rights being absolute. But I think the freest period in history is probably the 19th century in America, with some exception. Obviously, slavery in the South, obviously, it's inconsistent with the rights I'm describing. But in the latter half of the 19th century in America, you saw an insane rise in the standard of living. I think the more free we are, the more property rights are respected, the less government intervention we have, the more our standard of living rises and the better things get. I can see you have another question.
Yeah, you're speaking of the Gilded Age, obviously, the 1890s approximately. But I'll say that that's the time when we sent children down into coal mines in order to support families who were barely hanging on.
So I'm not a historian. I am suspicious of these recounts of the horrible times of the 19th century and early stages of capitalism. All I can point out is that there has been a large effort by people like Sinclair to misrepresent what was actually happening. And also, what were these kids, people act like capitalism invented child labor. What were these kids doing before capitalism, other than living on a farm, working from morning to night, as long as there was daylight, and dying young, and dying because they didn't have what they needed to live. People chose to move to the cities. I'm not sure about I don't know much about the coal mines. And arguably you could say that sending a kid into a coal mine is a violation of his rights because it's endangering him. I'm not sure of that specific situation. If that was happening, that should not have happened. But that is not what I'm advocating for. I'm advocating for rights. Again, capitalism inherited child labor.
Next question.
I don't think I need a mic.
No. Well, just so that the
right
camera
there.
picks up. Okay. So how do we combat situations of compulsion from the government, like bake the cake because you have to bake the cake because you can't?
With principles, with philosophy, with saying we have these rights. We need not just because.
Right, I get that, but how do we, get the government to basically stand aside as it should?
It's not going to happen overnight. I don't. Politics is the last stage of the game. It's been said that politics is downstream from culture, and I say culture is downstream from philosophy. I'm offering a philosophy that says you have an absolute right to think and to act, and what that looks like in practice is you have the absolute right to speak and the right to your property. That covers the gay cake, and it covers a lot of other things. But to just jump right to politics and say, how do we convince the government? The government essentially represents the culture in really anywhere. unless they were invaded. A government tends to reflect the philosophy of the culture. If our culture wants a lobby system, we get a lobby system, which is exactly what we have, and it's exactly what most people in America still want. We want the government picking winners and losers. We want the government to help certain people, whether it's helping the poor, helping this union, helping this big business because that'll help the economy, whatever it is. I'm saying individualism needs to be promoted philosophically, and but if you're going to go into politics, speak in principle, have moral courage. You'd be surprised how quickly people are intimidated when you just look them in the eye and say, here's the principle. These are not smart people. They're not brave.
All right, question over here. So with individual property rights being an absolute, like you said, how do you rectify group ownership and shareholding for a company like Facebook, where Zuck has sold interest in his company for monetary value to stakeholders, and ostensibly everybody participating as a stakeholder? So when you say that Zuck has the right to do whatever he will with his company, it's not solely his company. So how do you
You mean because he has shareholders?
Well, yeah, because those individuals also own parts of that company.
Yeah, so, I mean, a group is no more than the sum of its parts. Everyone who chose to associate with Zuckerberg is part of his company, and they know what they're getting into when they choose to work with him. But, I mean, a group doesn't have this new third person, this new external right, new type of right. It's just an individual has rights. Two people that enter into a contract together, their contract should be enforced and recognized by the government. I mean, yeah, this is I think that answers your question. Kane.
Should a company like YouTube or Facebook be held to their own user agreements?
Of course. So I don't know if Facebook violated their user agreement. I don't know if YouTube violated their user agreement, but I know that what YouTube/Google is being sued for is not violation of the user agreement. They're being sued for censoring Prager. Also, Facebook is not being held to the fire for simply violating their user agreement. They're being lynched, and it's gratuitous. And Ted Cruz, the alleged, capitalist, the guy who read Atlas Shrugged on the Senate floor and was supposed to be this shining white knight, he grilled Zuckerberg over censorship of conservatives. So, look, there's nobody good in Congress. Just turn off C-SPAN and throw your TV. But yeah, I mean, yeah, to answer your question, yes, the user agreement, like any contract, should be enforced by the government. Yeah, no. Like I said, I'd be thrilled if Zuckerberg broke the law, got arrested, and went to jail. It's called justice. I'm happy. I'm not friends with Zuckerberg. I'm not friends with Google and YouTube. If they break the law, if they violate a contract, fuck them. I'm not here to say, every businessman, should be given special privileges. Nobody should.
Are you in favor of...
Be close to the mic. Be close to the mic.
Yeah, it sounds like you're not that loud. I can hear you, but just speak up a bit.
Are you in favor of repealing the Civil Rights Act of 1964?
Ooh, good question, because that's a way to make me look bad. I'm not saying that you're. I'm not saying that you're malicious, but that's a good challenging question. So there are things I like about this. There are things I like about the Civil Rights Movement and Act, and there are things I don't like about it. And we tend to package things together, and you're all familiar with these package deals because, if you say that the alt-right has a right to speak, then you're labeled as part of the alt-right, just to give you an example. So if you oppose the Civil Rights Act for one aspect of it, there's a good chance people are going to call you racist, not that you're necessarily calling me that. So when it comes to Civil Rights Act, the Civil Rights Movement, there was clear racism coming from the government in certain states. Maybe some would say at the federal level, I don't know. But there was clear racist policies being used by government against blacks. And the Civil Rights Act, or something like it, should have come to protect the rights of every individual, black or any other race. As far as forcing restaurants and amusement parks to admit everyone, regardless of race, I think that's a violation of their property rights. Now, I would go with you and everybody here down to the zoo that's not allowing in black people, and I would protest. I would demonstrate. I would use my platform, it's a rather, decent-sized platform that I've got, I would bring attention to it. I'd say these guys are not letting black people into their zoo because they're black. And to force them to let people in is a violation of property rights, which I do believe in forcing them to let people in is to surrender my own rights and to surrender yours, and I'm not going to surrender either.
Rucka.
Yes.
So I agree with you on private business and building something out of nothing. I know a lot of people, most of the population doesn't realize how challenging it is to build something out of nothing that creates profit, that becomes sustainable, and a lot of YouTubers here, they've created their platforms. Some of them don't even think they should get paid for their platforms. I think it's bizarre. It's a weird mentality. But I work in manufacturing, and a lot of the manufacturing companies are family built, third generation, fourth generation, things like that. The one issue I have with government regulations from an environmental standpoint adds a cost to a lot of companies. But because I'm against government regulations, but in the case of the environment, that is something for me that I haven't been able to get around, because we don't want to turn into a country like China, where you can't walk around without masks on because the pollution is so bad. So what is your stance on
environmental stuff?
Environmental stuff.
Yeah. So I just want to point out real quick, the fact that all these questions pertain to the political sphere is interesting to me, and that so many challenges are coming with regard to, well, but what about this, what about that? And just like with the civil rights question, well, what about hate speech? Well, so somebody should be free to yell the N-word off their balcony, which I was never going to prove that I did. Which is the same argument we all deal with out there when we're making the case for free speech. People say, oh, so you're okay with this and with that? And I'm like, well, I'm not okay with it, but if it doesn't violate anybody, if it doesn't apply force to anybody, they should be free to do it. So as far as environmentalism, when it comes to pollution, I would, at a certain point, need to defer to legal scholars to identify when certain types of pollution are impeding on somebody's ability to live. I think the case can be made that having a certain level of smog is a consequence of having a city, having industry, living in a civilized human manner, which you don't have to. You can move outside the city. You can move to the outskirts, and I mean, so when it comes to I think property rights are what will eliminate pollution most of all, because if you're blowing smoke into somebody else's window, that's clearly a violation of his property. So I would defer to legal scholars when it comes to particular cases of when some pollution should be okay and when pollution is a violation of people's rights. But also, I think property rights and individualism is the way to get there. And like I mentioned earlier about child labor, what was China doing before they started allowing property, before they started allowing some elements of capitalism? What were the kids doing? What were the people doing? They were starving. They were miserable. So nobody's being forced to live in Beijing or wherever it is that it's allegedly so bad. And by the way, and if a company is causing excessive pollution, I mean, the case can be made that they're hurting the environment beyond what their manufacturing requires, then, by all means. It is, again, a very specific issue. I'm not the best one to answer. I'm not the best one to even be making any sort of case for free markets or anything like that. I'm really trying to talk about the principles underlying that. The principles being you have the right to think and you have the right to act, and therefore to think or to speak and to produce and own your property. Trade.
So, I'm just thinking there's got to be a more succinct way of highlighting the nuance that these major social media, the plight that they have, of their own rights, because it's a scary thing. People are afraid. They conflate it with they want to go back. It's 1980. They want to call it 1984 when we see censorship on with social media networks. Even though, yes, it is their right. Even though we hate it, and then the free market should be the one taking care of that or filling that gap where we see it. But it's so difficult. It's so difficult to penetrate the fear, because it's almost like a Caesar to save Rome kind of scenario. He's never gonna. It's intractable once it's codified into law, and that's exactly where it seems like we're going. And
So,
you're right.
so this is why it's so important to draw a distinction between private property and government. So the government can censor us. A private citizen who's not pointing a gun at anyone cannot. I don't really agree with the comparison of Facebook to Orwell's 1984. I don't imagine Winston was being spied on so that they can sell him cool shit. But nonetheless, nobody's being forced to use Facebook. Nobody's being forced to use the internet. And again, these questions keep bringing me back to making the pragmatic case for capitalism, which is not my favorite thing to do, but I will nonetheless. You want to see more Facebooks, you want to see a cooler internet, more types of internet, whatever. Deregulate everything further. Deregulate the financial industry. Watch capital pour into Silicon Valley. Watch people with more my view of life working in Silicon Valley and creating apps that don't discriminate against opinions because we want to see a debate. Whatever it is, it's regulation that limits our abundance, and our abundance of options is going to lessen even more the more we root for the government to impose itself on Facebook. I love the internet. By the way, and like I mentioned earlier, my shit's been deleted by YouTube. I've been, quote, censored by YouTube. Guys, what's the answer? To hand YouTube over to the government? You think they'd let me fucking do my shtick on there? So, I mean, it's just, it really is just a matter of principle. So, but yeah, deregulate and watch the world, watch your wildest dreams come true.
We're over here next.
So earlier you said you would like to build a second Phoenix outside Phoenix.
I was throwing ideas out, but yeah.
But your point was that the government had too much land.
Yeah, they shouldn't have any.
But doesn't the government have property rights?
No, the private citizens that work there can own property outside of the government, but the government itself is not a person, it's not a business. Because why should, if it were a business, then we have a company here that has the power to apply force to every other business? That's gang rule if I've ever seen it.
The government is just a business that's enforcing its own rules on its own land.
It should not be. That's what it's become. But as I mentioned in my lecture, I do believe the proper purpose of government. And you may say, "Oh, we'll never get there. It's too much corruption." Well, let's at least discuss what the government should be doing, and then we can discuss how to get there. The government should be an arbiter of disputes. So if you and I have a contract and we disagree, I think you ripped me off, you think I owe you money, they arbitrate. The government should arrest criminals, and the government should eliminate international threats. I know we had a bit of a heated Q&A in the last lecture, which you're welcome to ask me about, the purpose of government when it comes to threats from abroad or domestic. Anything else, or jump over to roaming again?
So first off, the Ben Shapiro impression, just spot on. So from what you're saying, role of government, I really agree with you. And would it be safe to say that you are a libertarian but not an ANCAP? You do acknowledge that there's some role.
I agree that I'm not an ANCAP, but I don't like the word libertarian because it is a political philosophy, and I am an objectivist, which is a philosophy. It covers all branches of philosophy, but I guess libertarian would be an easy way to sort of classify my politics.
Okay, well, with that in mind, and this is something that I get all the time from ANCAP because of the views that I seem to share with you. You acknowledge that there's a legitimate role for government, let's say enforcing contracts or national security, but you're also a property rights absolutist. How do you handle, if you can answer this on a philosophical level, the issue of taxation? Is that not coercion and I guess, violation of property rights?
Yeah, yes, it is. So this is the part where anyone who thought I might have a point will now just completely throw me away. That's crazy. So listen, we have a volunteer military, right? Yes. Why would anyone volunteer to go to the military? Well, because they want to defend the country, they want to defend the people they love, and they want to defend the land that they consider to be the greatest. And they're fighting for an idea. I do believe that someday it is possible we have voluntary taxes. That people, industrialists especially, the richest people have the most reason to pay taxes to protect their concerns, to protect their property, to make sure that no invaders and no criminals fuck their shit up. But I do believe it is possible to someday have a voluntary tax system. But keep in mind, in philosophy, we've got existence, we've got epistemology, knowledge, and then ethics. Politics is the last stage of the game. We need to have a philosophical revolution, an ethical revolution, where people embrace reason as the means of knowledge, where people embrace rational egoism as the proper ethics for living on Earth. And rational people would want to pay for their own defense. So it's hard to imagine today's shysters and today's bumbling, short-sighted cynics in America today offering money, but again, the government would be confined to very specific tasks of protecting our rights, and there would be a lot of money. People would be making, there would be a lot of prosperity. So I know it's difficult to answer that if you don't buy into my philosophy completely. Ultimately, the line of where taxes should be, ultimately they're going to win because they're pointing out that taxation is theft, and your answer to them at best can only be, well, but a little bit of theft is necessary. I don't believe in necessary evil. There is no conflict between the moral and the practical. I am selling a worldview that says doing the right thing will make the world a wonderful place, no exceptions.
We're back here next.
Yes.
A while ago, some while ago, I seem to remember you were on the Rubin report.
Yeah.
And you kind of challenged philosophers to take Ayn Rand seriously and criticize her as a serious philosopher. Challenge accepted.
Sorry, can you repeat that? Even though I should understand your accent. I should understand what you're saying, but by the way, do you know what an Israeli cow says? Moo. Alright, sorry, can you repeat that? What did I say on Rubin, or what did you?
Yes, you kind of challenge philosophers to take Ayn Rand seriously.
Yeah.
And criticize her as a serious philosopher.
Mm-hmm.
Challenge accepted. It will take me some time, but I will make a video about it.
Beautiful.
No questions now.
Thank you. Looking forward. Subscribing. Absolutely. So yeah, Ayn Rand is largely ridiculed. She's largely mocked. They ignore her, and then they make fun of her when she comes up. The students are penalized for even mentioning her name. It may be changing, but I mean, I have not yet seen somebody who I respect very much, who I think has an incredible amount of integrity and dismisses Rand. I think there's a lot to respect about Rand. There's a lot to learn from her, and I would love to see the intellectuals among us take her on. Don't take anything by faith. Take her on. Tell me why she's wrong. You know, change my mind, as the meme goes. Yeah. Any other questions?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So I think this is more like a point of clarification on what you were saying before. You were talking about the right to think and the right to act being, the right to think and the right to act being paramount. And when people were giving specific examples like the farmer blocking water from other people or pollution, a couple times you had said, and I think this really drives it home, is that those rights are paramount until you use those rights to violate the rights of other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, is that what you're trying to say applies to those situations? Like if the farmer's blocking off water to other people's stuff, he's violating the rights to use the property and land they bought, which had a river in it.
So look, when somebody uses their property in a way that impedes on someone else's property, such as me building a wall in front of your front door, then the case can be made and would be made that no, the purpose of your property, the purpose of your house is for you to walk in and out of it and to be in it. And if somebody's stopping you from doing that, then what they're doing with their property is, the purpose of rights is to live on earth, yeah? So, you know, something libertarians do a lot because they're so anti-philosophical, many of them, is that they say like, oh, if I trip and fall on your property, you could pull out a gun and blow my head off because I trespassed. Well, no, there's context, and if you trip and fall on someone's property, then you're not an invader. You're not an impeding army. So when it comes to these specific situations of like when interests conflict, I would have to defer to legal scholars for the specifics, but the standard being here that rights are requirements for living, right? To think and to act, and those carried out from speaking and creating and trading, those cannot be violated. There's going to be certain cases where the line may be a little bit arbitrary, but those are a very rare exception, and As long as the actual principle is not violated, you know, I would say we'll be in good shape.
Yeah, the goal of what it was going for is that it's the principle that not that solution will apply in everything. The starting point where we approach it philosophically is you don't use your rights to violate someone else's. If we start from there, then
Well, we should start earlier than don't use your rights to violate someone else's. We should start with what exists. Reality exists. It objectively exists. That's something that would get you made fun of in a philosophy department today. For 200 years plus, philosophers have been saying that reason has been disproven. So we need to start there. Ideas are the motor of history. We need to start with reality exists. I'm conscious. It's not an illusion. It's not, you know, chemicals tricking me. I am thinking. I'm choosing to focus on all of you, and I'm choosing what I'm going to say. And consciousness presupposes existence. So I exist before I'm my existence is taken for granted once I'm conscious. What I'm saying is existence exists whether or not I'm conscious of it. That's another controversial thing. Most philosophers in recent centuries say a primacy of consciousness. Your consciousness is the only thing you know for sure. So you could be creating all this in your mind. You exist. If you're conscious, that means you exist. So existence exists. And we take it from there. Then we get to, okay, if I exist and reality is real, what should I do?
Rocka, debating with you is a popular pastime in this room for sure. We're getting right up at 12:30, so last question over here.
All right.
So, with the advent of Patreon and people voluntarily giving money for services that they want even though they do not need to, does that give you hope for your voluntary tax?
I mean, it's a good example of people supporting what they love. I mean, people do that all the time. I mean, people do things like that. People in a free society, people with living in a prosperous society are benevolent. I appreciate somebody, you know, I donate to Ruben and I donate to Yaron Brook. I don't need to. I consume their content. So it does, of course, look, the voluntary military and also just the fact that businessmen want to protect what's theirs. So absolutely, Patreon is a great example of people voluntarily funding something that enhances their life. And I think once the proper philosophy for living on Earth is embraced by a culture, and we successfully carry that out into the realm of politics, you would see a voluntary tax system which has plenty of surplus to do what's necessary. And what's necessary is to one of the important things that's necessary is to let aggressors, foreign and domestic, know that violating the rights of the individual is not okay. Because I know we're out of time, so I'm just going to say this in reference to earlier. The reason that the West is being made a mockery of is because we have no moral confidence. We've abandoned our Enlightenment values, and we don't see ourselves as worth defending. So whether it's rape gangs in one neighborhood, or whether it's the Islamic Republic of Iran chanting death to America and funding terrorism around the world, or Saudi Arabia doing the same thing, these threats need to be identified and eliminated, and it would take a week. So this is not, it's philosophy that makes a difference. It's our moral confidence that we need.
All right, thanks everyone. We're it's an hour and a half for lunch, so we don't have to eat like a hungry dog and wolf it all down. 2 o'clock back here.
Okay, everybody. I can't see the comments. They haven't moved for about maybe 30 minutes, but it does show that it's live, and I received confirmation from somebody else who's watching that the comments still are rolling, but for some reason I can't see them. Anyways, I wanted to mention a couple of things. Yeah, the audience seems to be a little bit bigger today, about maybe 90 people. And also, I'm going to be making a commentary about this particular subject right here, regarding the thing that I brought up, about businesses being, regulated, heavily regulated to be forced to serve people and stuff like that. I'm totally against that. I believe in neutrality. It brings other people down from, or up from the rudders who actually have a similar idea, who could otherwise be accepting of, or not forced to serve people, but understand the flaws in being regulated, and just be willing to go out there and serve whoever they want and make their business flourish, instead of restricting it to certain individuals. And that would be a competition. That's the way society, that's the way our commerce works. So that's what I'm for. I understand what she was saying about that, but it's just, again, regulation after regulation after regulation. Sooner or later, it's everything is going to be that way. So, anyways, I'm going to go ahead and shut this down. I'm gonna go out for a little bit. I need to get something to drink. But I'm going to be seeing if I can chat with some people here during this intermission, to see if I can get like their take on what they think of the Kilroy event, get their ideas about what's good, what's bad, and hopefully be able to share that on here. Now, just FYI, I'm not going to be forcing anybody to speak if they don't want to, even though it's a free speech event. So I'm going to be doing it to where I ask. And if they let me ask questions, I will try to ask as hard and difficult questions as possible, and go with that. Anyways, I'm going to end this chat for now. I hope you guys all enjoyed it. I enjoyed the comments, except when they stopped. I will talk to you guys later. Take care. Bye-bye.